Now that we have an idea of Japan's complex security environment, let's have a look at its defense capabilities, how it's capable of defending itself. And as we will see, it is not completely a toothless dragon as one could potentially imagine. In fact, although Japan's defense budget is maintained within the 1% of its gross domestic product, it is, because of its economic development, one of the top 10 global largest spenders, with roughly 50 or maximum 50 billion US dollars spent annually, which is around the same level or just after France, Germany, or the United Kingdom. On the right, you can see a comparison with China and the United States. $48 billion are the numbers for 2019, 266 for China, maintained within 2% of GDP, and of course, the largest spender of the world being the United States, which accounts 3.5 of its gross domestic products. Japan and its self-defense forces are in fact also some of the most modern and technologically advanced military. They have the last generation battle tanks, helicopters, fighter jets, drones, you name it, of course, benefiting from its lasting security alliance with the United States. It is an extremely competent and well-trained army. And in fact, some may argue that after the United States, it is operationally one of the most capable military force in East Asia. Now, of course, the Chinese military is much larger, but in terms of experience and technological advancement of its military equipment, Japan arguably ranks higher. The problem of Japan is that it has no offensive capabilities, so no bombers, aircraft carriers, or any long-range offensive missiles. Again, here we have to think of the rather thin line between offensive and defensive, because, for instance, Japan has extremely capable helicopter carriers, which are not aircraft carriers, but technically could be used for offensive purposes. They're mostly used for disaster relief. And of course, the main limitation is related to its constitution. Here again, purely limiting the circumstances of its action within the national territory or within the UN peacekeeping system. It is rather small in terms of manpower, 250,000 active personnel. We currently consider up to 280,000 military personnel, but it still remains very small at the global level. To defend itself from the greatest threats, which, as we could see, was the North Korean missile threat, it has developed a rather sophisticated ballistic missile defense system. When such missile approaches the Japanese territory, it is immediately caught by the radar, by the satellite system, and there is a J alert early warning system that warns the population of the concerned territory by telephone, on the TV and radio, etc. In terms of missiles, the systems are stationed on Aegis-equipped destroyers, which can intercept the missile in the mid-course. And if it approaches closer to the territory, they are eventually destroyed by the Patriot advanced capability by the ground self-defense forces. All this is done in close cooperation in information sharing with the United States and Korea. To give you an idea, these would be roughly the ranges of surveillance areas by the ground, air, and maritime self-defense forces, with a major change since 2012. As we could see, the China threat and the defense of the Senkaku-Diaoyu Islands has become a strategic priority for Japan. So eventually the development of the southwestern region, or the reinforcement of its defense capabilities in the southwest, have become a priority. It has been upgraded through a radar, through a deployment of a missile capabilities in the Ryukyu archipelago, and also by the establishment of a first fully fledged amphibious unit, which is specifically trained to reconquer eventually remote islands. Now, of course, we can imagine that it is meant or designed for the Senkaku Islands, but it can also be used for other islands. To give you a closer look at how this strengthened southwestern region defense looks like, this is taken from the Japan National Defense Guidelines from 2013, which develops basically the type of capabilities that will be deployed and are now deployed in the region. Perhaps to conclude, just a few words on Japan's nuclear policy. Well, as you can imagine, Japan is 100% opposed to any possible use of nuclear power for offensive purposes. And in 1967, it already declared the 3 non-nuclear principles, meaning non-possession, non-production, and non-introduction of nuclear weapons on its soil. So it relies on the US nuclear umbrella, but it is also committed to the promotion of the peaceful use of nuclear power worldwide, and to contribute to nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation worldwide. On the other hand, it must be said that Japan is one of the most developed nuclear powers in a way, because it possesses some of the best technology and experience with nuclear power. We said that Japan is does not have any natural resources, hydrocarbon resources of its own, and is completely dependent on imports of oil and gas from the Middle East. That's why the development of nuclear energy, nuclear power plants has been for the longest time one of the strategic priorities of the Japanese government. In fact, prior to the 2011 Fukushima power plant disaster, and there was 30% of Japan's total electric consumption coming from nuclear energy, and the goal was to increase it to 40%. Unfortunately, after the Fukushima disaster, the public concerns for the safety of nuclear installations made the Japanese government shut most of its nuclear reactors. Out of 54 theoretically operational reactors, only 9 are operational today. But this is to say that some may argue that having such an advanced research and skill in nuclear technology, Japan could technically eventually develop it further. Of course, the strong public opposition towards anything nuclear prevents and will forever prevent Japan for any such offensive move. The US-Japan Security Alliance and the relationship with the United States are, of course, the cornerstone of Japan's security and defense for now the past 70 years. And it has been always a rather mutually beneficial relationship. For Japan, it allowed, relying on the US security umbrella, allowed it to focus fully on the development of its economy, especially in the post-war context and during the Cold War, which became known as the Yoshida Doctrine. And I'm sure my colleague Celine will be speaking extensively about that. It also allowed Japan to access US nuclear umbrella, benefit from the nuclear umbrella, and to access the top-notch military technology of the United States. It allows it also, and quite importantly, to continue keeping a very low military profile, which is important in its dealings with its neighbors, which are constantly cautious about any prospect of potential Japanese remilitarization for historical reasons. For Japan, it allowed to gain an important strategic footprint in East Asia for the past 70 years, to have a permanent military presence in the region, from which eventually it also deployed to Vietnam, Korea, etc. in the past. And last but not least, it was also an important and interesting source of income and a lucrative business for the US defense industry, because Japan has been acquiring 90% of all its defense technology and capabilities from the United States as part of the US foreign military states system. On the other hand, not everything is always rosy, of course. There is this constant fear of abandonment, which is inherent, with the possibility of the US eventually not fully committing to the alliance in case of a fully fledged war or conflict with North Korea or China, which raises this prospects of strategic uncertainty that has been weighing heavily on Japanese policymakers. There is, of course, the issue of costs. The US now have almost 80 military facilities on the Japanese soil, which are, of course, fully covered from the Japanese budget. And finally, there has been a number of public scandals, unfortunately, related to rape issues and the misbehavior of the Japanese military, mostly in their bases in Okinawa. On the US side, you also have a fear, and this time we call it the fear of entrapment, for the same reason, of a fear of being drawn into a serious conflict in case of a North Korean attack or a major clash by the North Korea, or a major clash with China. And of course, the essential issues and the criticism of the United States of the alliance has been the lack of reciprocity and insufficient burden sharing, not enough investing into the relationship, or not having the kind of expected results. Eventually, the fears of abandonment and entrapment could be applicable to other US allies in the region, such as Korea or Taiwan. And as we will see, they have been very much accentuated also recently under the Trump administration. But to say that Japan has been, of course, holding this relationship extremely high in its strategic priorities, it has been, and being under the pressure or increasing demand for greater burden sharing, it has been trying to please its US partner for the longest time. One of the key issues has been the right of collective self-defense, which again should be a normal attribute of any sovereign nation and is usually part of any security alliance. You help your ally in need. So the issue of collective self-defense has been on the table for a very, very long time, obviously controversial due to its constitutional limitations, and brought up by the United States on numerous occasions, especially in the context of its deployment in the Middle East throughout the 90s and at the beginning of 2000s. When the Prime Minister Koizumi took office, he eventually managed to bend or push a number of legal measures that allowed the deployment of the Japanese self-defense forces in support of the United States operation in Afghanistan in 2001 by disguising them as anti-terrorism special measures law, and afterwards in the reconstruction efforts in Iraq in 2004. It needs to be reminded that this was the first ever deployment of the Japanese armed forces outside of the Japanese territory since the Second World War. Eventually, Abe's administration managed to approve a package of those limited collective self-defense measures, which under circumstances allows the self-defense forces to step in defense of a fellow UN peacekeeping unit in defense of Japanese civilians abroad, etc. The insistence to maintain the strong pillar and strong relationship with the US has eventually led to further, if you want to, pleasing by revising the US-Japan defense guidelines in 2013, including a number of commitments towards joint development and strengthening, upgrading of the Japanese ballistic missile defense. As I said, and as you can imagine, the growing strategic uncertainty of the future of the US-Japan alliance has taken a toll with the arrival of the US President Donald Trump into power, and the discourse and the shift in the US foreign policy towards more domestic issues, potentially meaning less interest in foreign and security, which hasn't been really the case. There has been rumors of the US requesting the increase of payments by Japan for the US bases. And also Japan has been very worried to see some of the threats of withdrawal of the US military presence from Korea or from Germany. But it's basically this uncertainty and unpredictability of the current administration that has been extremely closely watched by Japan. In a way, a very recent decision in June 2020 by Japan to eventually scrap the deal of upgrading the ballistic missile defense system by purchasing 2 Aegis destroyers from the United States has been one of the harbingers, saying that Japan may be eventually looking to reassess its excessive reliance on the United States. And it is true that it is also opening dialogue and possibilities to, with cooperation possibilities with other partners to diversify its security options and eventually gain a little bit of more strategic autonomy.